My mother was a prostitute. My father was a pimp. I bet I got your attention now. I'm half black and half white. My mother's Irish, from Worcester, Massachusetts. My father was an African-American male from down south, Montgomery, Alabama. My father was 24 years old when he met my mother. My mother was 19. Together, they would go on to live a very reckless and ruthless life together. Both my mother and father were alcoholics and drug addicts. My father was a very abusive man, and he spent the majority of my childhood going in and out of prisons. I remember one time specifically, he was beating my mother. We were in our bedroom, myself at the age of 8, my older brother who was at the age of 10, and my younger brother who was at the age of 2. And I remember hearing the noise and my mother screaming at the top of her lungs, but the neighbors wouldn't do nothing because they were racist. They would say things to my mother like, "You nigger lover." This was back in the 80s when it wasn't cool for a black person to be with a white person. And I remember hearing my mother scream at the top of her lungs and furniture being thrown around and all the beats and slaps, and you could hear it all coming right through the door. We were in our bedroom with the door closed. And I remember my younger brother, I was about 8, he was about 2. And he jumped out of the bed and he ran to the door as if he wanted to open the door up. But he knew better. At the age of 2, he knew he shouldn't open that door. And he ran to that door. He ran to that door and he stood in front of it. And he stood on his tippy toes. And he clenched his whole body tight like this. And he screamed at the top of his lungs. And I remember being scared. And I jumped out of the bed and I put my hand around his mouth. And I covered his mouth because I didn't want my father to hear that noise. I didn't want my father to hear him screaming. Because maybe my father might come in there and start beating on us. Yeah, my father would be high on drugs. He was very abusive to my mother and to myself and to my siblings. And I remember the next morning when I woke up, it seemed like something that wasn't real. It seemed like something that wasn't real at all. As I opened the door for the bedroom the next morning, it looked like something, there was a murder scene in a movie. Blood everywhere. Blood on the floor and blood on the kitchen table and blood on the walls and blood on the kitchen cabinets. And I remember being 8 years old and wondering to myself if my mother was even alive or not. Because at that point, we didn't see her. Finally, when we did get to see my mother didn't even look human. Her face was beat up and swelled up and black and blue and fat and blood everywhere. And I remember my father. I was 8 years old. And my older brother was 10 years old. And I remember my father made me and my older brother get on our hands and knees and clean up our own mother's blood. My father was a very abusive man when he was high on drugs and alcohol. I remember one time specifically, I was 12 years old. And my father had found out that me and my older brother was fighting. And that I tried to stab my older brother. At this time, I'm 12 and my older brother was 14. And so my father said, "Yeah, I have something for you." So he took me outside. He picked up a big piece of wood. And he said, "I'm going to beat you, son. But for this specific beating, he had rules. And the rules were, I would have put my hands on the bumper of the car. And so I put my hands on the bumper of the car. And the rules were that if I took my hands off the bumper of the car, my beating would start all over again." And so I remember, 12 years old, I wrapped my hands around that bumper. My father lifted up the piece of wood and he brought it down across my back. Whack! Immediately, my hands came off of the bumper and I screamed in pain. And my father looked at me and he said, "Son, don't let this keep happening." So again, I wrapped my hands around that bumper. My father reached back with the wood, came across my back again. Crack! But I held the bumper this time. And he did it again. Crack! And I held the bumper. And he did it again. Crack! Crack! And he kept hitting me. But I held on to that bumper. And I didn't let go of the bumper. And at one point, a woman came out the building. She came out the building. It was a black woman, I remember. And she was standing up on her porch. And she said, "You better leave that boy alone." She said, "I'm going to call the cops on you. You better leave that boy alone." And my father just continued to beat me. And beat me. And beat me. But I tell you, I didn't let go of that bumper. And when my father was finished, my body was beat up. My flesh was soft and torn from my back up here below down to behind my knees. The flesh was welted up, scraped up, bleeding. And my father took me and he said, now sit in the car. And he made me sit down. He made me sit on what he had just done to me. He made me sit on it. And at a certain point, my father said, come here, I want you to get out the car. Now at this point, I thought, maybe he was gonna apologize. You know what I'm saying? Maybe he was gonna say he was sorry for beating me so bad. You know what I'm saying? Because my dad would do that sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes he would tell me, that famous line that a lot of us heard, that beating hurt me more than it hurt you. But nah, this is not what he had. This is not what he had in store for me. This is not what he had to say to me. He looked me in my face and he said, son, I want you to know something. He said, I want you to know that I didn't stop beating you because that woman told me to stop beating you. I stopped beating you because the stick broke. And I remember at the age of 12, when I went home and I had my own little recipe. I had my own little medicine. I would put my headphones on, I would put music on, and I would block everything out. And the music that I would listen to was this hip-hop music. And I would listen to this music and I would memorize the words of the music and I would just shut myself in the bedroom and listen to this music. And what I used for a getaway, what I used for a refuge, at the time I didn't realize it was a cancer that was killing me. It was warping my mentality. It fed my anger. It fed my frustration. It fed my confusion. It fed all the things that would later come out in my actions. And those actions would produce things called consequences. And I remember I would put this music on and I would listen to this music and the music, pretty much all it talked about was, how much weed you smoked and how much money you had and what cars you drove and what jewelry that you wore. And where I lived in my community, that's all I saw. Everywhere I looked, I could see a drug spot. I grew up in Great Brook Valley Projects. It's the largest projects in Massachusetts. And it was the worst one too at that time. And everywhere you looked in Great Brook Valley Projects, you could see what they called a punto. A point, a spot, a drug spot. Everywhere you looked, that spot sold weed, and that spot sold crack, and that spot sold coke, and that spot sold heroin. Everywhere you looked, you could see a drug spot. And I remember listening to this music and thinking that, in order to be a man or in order to be successful, I had to carry a gun and I had to have jewelry and I had to be sleeping with mad women and I had to have money and I had to have cars and these are the things I grew up listening to, and my community, my environment supported it. I grew up around drug dealers and pimps and hoes. Like I said, my mother was a prostitute. My father was a pimp. But the destruction was in my immediate environment. Matter of fact, I remember a situation where my father had got out of prison and they put him on parole, but they messed up. And they gave him a female parole officer, and he was a pimp, and he had the gift of gab, and he could speak and manipulate. Before you knew it, he was sleeping with his parole officer, pimping his parole officer, and turned around and shot a man with his parole officer's gun. And her father was a judge. And this was all over the news. And I remember being a little boy and watching a newspaper clip. My dad was on the front page. And it wasn't for doing nothing good. It wasn't for doing anything special. It wasn't for being heroic. In fact, there were about 10 officers standing there while my dad was laying on the ground. 10 officers posing for a newspaper clip with their foot on my father. That's what I remember as a young man. My environment was different. My immediate environment was different. My father's sister shot and murdered a man and did time in prison for it. My older brother had murdered 2 people, did time in prison for it. My brother, who was 2 years older than me, shot a man when he was 17 years old. He shot a man 7 times in his chest, in his neck, all of that, and went away to prison for 10 to 15 years when he was 17 years old. Later on, they would charge me with attempted murder for shooting somebody. I was 22 years old when I got raided by the feds. One of the first CPAC units to ever exist. FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, DEA caught me with a half a kilo of cocaine, ecstasy, amitriptyline, a gun, and over 300 rounds of ammunition. They put it in the news saying, oh, he's like a low drug lord and all this other stuff. I was 22 years old. They were telling me they were going to send me away for 20 to 30 years. I ended up getting a 15-year sentence out of that. But let's go back to the story. As I was 15 years old, and I used to listen to this music, and then the music, I also used to watch the movies, you know, the mafia movies, you know what I'm saying? And this is the way things are done, and this is the way you handle things, this is the way you inflict fear, and this is the way you take control, and this is the way, and that anger from the abuse. As I spent my entire childhood going in and out of, back then they used to call it DSS. Now they call it DCF. I used to go in and out of DSS foster homes and in and out of DYS lockup facilities. And I started going to jail as soon as I was old enough to go at the age of 17. And before you knew it, I was 22 years old and got sent away to 15 years in prison, a minimum mandatory sentence, which meant that I could not receive good time. I could not get parole. I had to do 15 years day for day. I'll get to that part of the story in a second. So I'm 15 years old, and I'm being inspired by this rap music. This rap music, it told my whole community, told people all across the world. It wasn't just me. There were people in Russia and China doing the same, wearing baggy jeans and wearing their pants. Back then it was baggy jeans. Now they wearing tight jeans. I don't know what's going on. But at the end of the day, it wasn't just me. They were telling it to the whole world. And young kids were buying it. Young kids were believing that these rappers who were saying the things that they're saying, we were believing that that was the life that they were really living. And some of them maybe possibly were living a fraction of what the things they were actually saying. But me, I wanted it to be better than them all. I wanted to be badder than them all. I'm believing the stuff I'm hearing as if they're really living it. And then I'm going and walking it out, suffering the consequences myself. 15 years old, I remember my first gun charge. And I was with some older folks, and I was drinking, and I had told myself at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, we was on our way to the store with 2 other gentlemen. I was about 15, the other one was about 16, 17, maybe the other one was about 18. And I told myself, I said, I'm gonna rob everybody who I see on the way to the store. The only problem is, at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning in the hood, the only people are out are drug dealers and gangbangers. So if you're going to rob somebody, you might get something back. And so on our way to the store, we're walking about 1/3 of the way. I seen some dudes, stick it up. Let me get that. Robbed them. Seen another group of individuals, stick them up. Robbed them. Got to the third group of individuals. They were older cats. Stuck them up too. Went to the store. While I was in the store, somebody called the police on me. I thank God for that day, because I believe that that was supposed to be the day I was supposed to die. Somebody called the police. Police show up at the store. Come immediately to me. They grab me. They find crack cocaine in my back pocket and a .38 Smith & Wesson Special on me. I was 15 years old. My other 2 friends that was with me, they had nothing on them. They let them go. My 2 friends, now they're on their way back walking. They have to cut through that same projects to get to the end of the projects where they live. And who's there? That last group of gentlemen, those older men with guns, shotguns. Boom, boom. They take off running. I hear about it. But the crazy thing is I was so drunk that night. So drunk. That I know myself. They would have started shooting. I would have started shooting back. So drunk, I would probably been so drunk I couldn't run, trip and fall, and get my brains blown out. Who knows? Those 2 of my friends, they got away. I got away too, in the back of a paddy wagon. 15 years old, my first gun charge. I'm sharing all this with you because as my life continued to develop, I remember there was a time where I wanted to do the right thing, and I tried to get into the Navy. At that point, I had only had a juvenile record, and a couple of things I had on my adult record, I had beat them. So I was still eligible. And I said, man, I gotta stop living this life. And so I tried. But I have 2 6-inch screws in my left ankle. And although it didn't hinder me from doing anything, I could still play basketball, still do all the things I wanted to do. The officer told me, unfortunately, we can't bring you in because you have a medical problem and blah, blah, blah. Later on, he told me what the real reason was, and it was because I had a fiance and I had 3 sons. And he said the military, the Navy is not looking to take on the financial responsibility of your whole family. They're more interested in kids, young kids out of high school and college who don't have any dependents. And that's really the reason why they're not letting you go. What you should have did is finish boot camp first, and then after you finish boot camp, then you go and you put your wife and your children, you know, on your paperwork. So what did I do? I went back to the street life. Didn't have no education. Grew up around chaos and misery. I was good at only one thing, and that was selling drugs. So I went back to selling drugs. Thought I was doing the right thing. Thought I was trying to take care of my kids. And before I knew it, like I said, FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals kick in the door. I go to prison. Everybody who was there ratted. The only one who didn't rat was my baby brother. Other than that, they all snitched. They all pointed the finger. It was him. It was Nick. And just the very night before, as we're all sitting around a big table, mountains of cocaine and mountains of cash and guns and everything else, and everybody's talking about how real they are and how street they are and how they would never rat, how they would never tell. And then the very next morning, FBI kicks in the door and everybody's pointing the finger. I was 22 years old. I took 15 years on my back. That's when I gave my life over to Christ. When I went in at the age of 22, peep this, when I went in at the age of 22, I had already had 15 years in the system. At the age of 22, when most individuals, when they end up in jail, they probably only been in the game for like 2 or 3 years. They probably 17, 18, just started selling drugs. When I went in at the age of 22, I had already had 15 years of going in and out of the system, from foster homes to DYS locker facilities to jail. My first crime was in 1988. I was charged with breaking and entering. This is all on my record. This could all be proven. I'm not selling wolf tickets here. And at that moment, I lifted my hands up and I said, God, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this. I give my life to you. I ended up being sentenced to 15 years in prison. And what did I do while I was incarcerated? I studied the Word of God. I started to witness to other Christian brothers while I was incarcerated. I seen everybody from murderers and gangbangers, one of the head leaders of the Latin Kings, give their life over to Christ and start walking with God. And God would use me and use me and use me. And I'm like, God, I got this 15-year sentence. 15 years. That means I can't even see good time. I can't get out on probation or parole. Like, what's good? You know, I gave my life to you. Like, I'm trying to serve you. Like, are you going? Year after year would pass. I'm still incarcerated. I put in motions to appeal. Every appeal got denied. I put in motions. I put in SJC appeal and the Supreme Judicial Court, which is the SJC. I put in the direct appeal, and I put in several different motions. Every single appeal and every single motion got denied, 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 denied. And then one day, the law changed. One day, thin air, the law changed. I remember the case. It was the Melendez-Diaz and George Vasquez case. And the cases both stated that if the chemist who tested your drugs didn't show up at your trial, but only produced a document that said that your drugs were real, then they violated your constitutional right because you did not have the chance to face your accuser. So we now have to give you a new trial. So they flipped my case. Long story short, God gave me back 7 years of my life. 7 years. 7 years. And at that point, I thought the struggle would be over. Was the struggle over? No. So I get out and I start serving God on the street, and I'm going back into prison speaking to men, and I'm going into DYS locker facilities speaking to young men, you know what I'm saying? And I'm speaking at Boston Center for Family and Youth, and I'm speaking at Bridging the Gap program for the Salvation Army Kroc Center, and I'm speaking at all these different speaking engagements. I spoke for Boston University and Andover Newton School of Theology, you know what I'm saying? And I'm going places, and I'm sharing my story, and I'm sharing my testimony, and I'm trying to do the right thing. Then I get thrown a curveball that I wasn't ready for. And the curveball was, when I first got incarcerated, my son, my firstborn, ended up in foster care. And I had gotten out and I had fought the case and I tried to do everything right. And two homosexual white men were trying to adopt my son. And I fought it to the core. I fought it. And look at me, and I'm here, and I came out, and I got myself back into school. I graduated from one of the top 20 colleges in the nation, Boston University. And I'm like, I'm doing all the right things. And I had gotten a job, and they promoted me at my job. And I even started a little company on the side. And I'm like, you know, here I am, you know, I want my son back. You know, his mother was off in the streets and you know, living a fast life, to say the least. I just said, I want my son back, and I fought. And in the meantime, at the time, I was currently still married, and I was trying to work on that relationship. But when you went away for 8 years, and you're trying to come back into, at the time, it was my wife and my children's life, my children were like, yeah. But the woman who is now my ex-wife, she had different thoughts. And while we're trying to work things out, I find out she has an affair. So I'm going to court fighting for my son, and I lose the case, and then my son gets adopted by two homosexual men. And I just knew, because I studied the word, I just knew, no, this is not going to happen. Why? Because this cannot be God's will. There's no way that it is God's will for my son, who's black, darker than me. His mother's black. I'm half black and half white. He's black. Complete. So 75% black, 25% white. He's dark skinned. There's no way that the best interest for my son, a young black man, is to be adopted by two white homosexual men. That's what I thought. And I prayed and I fasted. And I said, God, all I want to do is be a man of God. All I want to do is be a great husband. All I want to do is be a great father. I know my intentions were pure. And I lose the case. Case closed. You lose the adoption. Long story short, I lose my son to two white homosexual men. The thoughts and the fears and the worries and the concern for my son are so overwhelming. And at the same time, I'm thinking that I'm going to have my wife at the time, and she turns around and has an affair, and it's just way more than I can handle and way more than I can understand. And I'm just saying to myself, and I'm saying to God, like, yo, how could this be your will? And the pain was so real, and the pain was so deep. And I'm going to be real. I knew better. I'm going to be real. On both sides of my family, my black side and my white side, on both sides of my family, they're alcoholics and drug addicts. My Irish side, they all drink like fish. My black side from down south, they all drink like fish. Generational curses, you can call it what you want. Science, you can call it the how thin or thick the cortex of the brain is. It's more prone to addiction. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But I knew better. But the pain was so bad that all I wanted to do is just numb it. I just wanted to numb it just a little bit. Just numb this pain. Let me grab myself a beer. Let me grab myself a shot of some vodka. Long story short, trying to relieve that pain, started to feel better. Temporary fix, I started to feel better. I started to drink. Before I know it, the drinking took over my life. I ended up divorcing my ex-wife. I divorced her. Started just living reckless, living however I wanted to live. I had a company. The company was making a lot of money. I would just go place and spend money ridiculously. I wouldn't go to casinos. I'd eat out at restaurants every single day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The money, just throwing money away. Drinking. And the crazy part about it was, I didn't try to quit because I could still function. I was a functioning alcoholic. I done gave presentations at BU drunk. I used to run the business department at the Salvation Army and did all their hiring and did all their interviewing and did their training and so on and so forth. I did it drunk. Did it drunk. I would go and speak at certain engagements, still speaking. I'd do it drunk. Started running the company. The company was very successful. Did it drunk. So certain things weren't falling apart, and so you start to tell yourself you don't have a problem. It's not really a problem yet, because you can still function, you can still manage things, you can still do certain things. My pastor told me, he said, wow, it's crazy that you're still alive and that you were able to have and maintain a company throughout all that time. Do you know how many times, I don't even know, I can't count on my hands how many times God saved my life because I'd be so drunk and be driving long distances and would fall asleep on the road. Fall asleep. I would wake up in the opposite lane. I would wake up swerving. I would wake up and just miss a car and just, I can't even count how many times that happened. God was keeping me alive for a reason. And I drank. And let me tell you, drinking, because I know a lot of people who drink. Let me tell you, drinking. This drinking was so serious. Like, I tried quitting a few times. I tried quitting, and my body would shake, and you know, I'd sweat. I'd be in the room, and had the AC on, but I'm pouring sweat. I can't take the pain. Body have withdrawals. All right, I'm out of here. I go to the liquor store right around the corner, start drinking. My drinking was so bad. I'll start off with this. My drinking was so bad that scientifically speaking and medically speaking, if I were to just stop, I would die. Like, my organs would shut down and I would die. Even when you go to a rehab or something, they feed you a medication to slowly help you wean off of alcohol. They say, in fact, that alcohol withdrawals are more dangerous and more deadly than heroin withdrawals. I drank. When I say I drank, I mean I drank. I went to sleep drunk. I woke up drunk. All day long, I drank. I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm drinking. Peep this. It would be close to 11 o'clock at night. I'd see the time, know that the liquor store's closed. I'd jump up, throw my shoes on, jump in the car, dip off, and buy enough alcohol. Why? So I could have enough alcohol for tonight and enough alcohol for tomorrow morning when I woke up. Why? Because my body could not handle waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and having to wait until 9 o'clock in the morning just to get another drink. I'd be in Boston working, driving up and down Blue Hill Avenue. And there's a liquor store on every corner. Liquor store on every corner. I couldn't drive past a liquor store without stopping to get something to drink. And there are individuals who knew me at this stage, and they could testify that what I'm telling you is the 100% truth. I have a worker to this day who was like, oh my God, Nick, I can't believe you stopped drinking. I used to pick the dude up 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to go on work sites, him and some other dudes, and had alcohol right in my car. I have drink Gatorade bottles full of vodka. Half Gatorade, rest vodka. All day long, I would drink. I couldn't watch a movie and see somebody cracking a beer or getting a sip of wine without going to my refrigerator and grabbing something. I was addicted, and it was a stronghold. And like I said, I tried to quit several times. Several times, try to quit. The body would shake, so on and so forth. And I remember one day specifically. I told God, I said, you God, I'm fed up with this, right? But I know I can't quit, and I know what happens to my body, and this and that, so I'm really just fed up with life, fed up with everything, so I'm ready to die now, right? So I poured out all the alcohol in my apartment. And I told God, I said, check this out. I said, if I die, this is on you, God. I said, I'm willing to die. That's how much. From this day forward, I'll never have a drink again in my life. I'm willing to die. If my body shuts down, if the organs shut down, I'm willing to die. And if I die, that's on you. That's what I told God. The next thing I told God, I said, I'm going to give you my entire life. I'm going to give you my body as a living sacrifice. I'm going to give you my body. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to smoke marijuana. I'm not going to smoke cigarettes. I'm not going to look at pornography anymore. I'm not going to masturbate. I'm not going to have sex with any female until the day I get married. And if you make me wait, Lord, a year or 3 years or 5 years, let's go. Because I want to see what you can do with my life if I give it entirely to you. That's what I said. I told God, I said, I want to see what you can do. I want to see what you can do if I give you my entire life. Next morning I woke up, went to work, finished work early, like around 1 o'clock, and in my mind, the devil was right there. Yo, man, you driving past a liquor store right now, you need to stop. Stop by that liquor store, grab yourself a drink. You need to stop. Devil was in my head. You know you can't do this. Grab yourself a drink. And I said, nah. I said, I'll die first. I'll die first. I called my man up, my best friend, my best man. Called him up. He's a pastor out in Connecticut. Big shout out to my brother, Clinton Adams Jr. I called him up. I told him what I was going through. And I said, man, I ain't drinking, man. I ain't drinking. He said, yo, let me pray for you. As soon as he started to pray, the phone went out. Couldn't hear nothing. Jip, 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 jip. Breaking up, jip, 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 jip. As soon as he was done praying, his voice came back in completely clear. I said, yo, bro, I didn't get to hear anything you were saying. He said, yeah, man, the area that I'm driving in, there is no reception. But you know what? I got to go run. I'm at work right now. I'm going to go do what I'm doing. But when I call, later on, you can call me back. I said, all right, cool. The crazy thing is, God has something else in store for my deliverance. Because if I can't hear my brother on the phone that when he's praying for me, that means I can't be in agreement. And the scripture says when 2 or more gather in agreement, you can have what it is that you ask of me. But there was no agreement because I couldn't even hear what it is that he was praying. So then what happened? I'm driving. I text my bishop, my previous bishop. I was at a church. I used to go to this church, and the man was a good man, and he would give me advice, and I would sit down and talk with him. So I text him. But he was busy, and he didn't get back to my text till later on in the evening. So I sat and I waited for like 5-10 minutes. I didn't hear from him, so I just kept driving. Got back in my truck and kept driving. Now I'm driving up Blue Hill Avenue, and it came to my spirit. Go to a church where there are cars in the parking lot. So I drove past the church, didn't see no cars in the parking lot. Kept driving, drove past another church, didn't see no cars in the parking lot. Then I drove by Jubilee Church.
Just the other day, I walked in here for morning prayer, and on Friday morning, there was a young man that was kneeled here at the altar, just crying out to God. When I walked past him, I realized that there was something that was stirring in his spirit. There was something different about him. And we went on and had prayer. And after prayer service was over, right around 7:30 or so, I saw him over here talking to Pastor Michael Manigault. And Pastor Mike brought him over to me. And he said, Pastor, I want to introduce you to this young man. This young man was driving down Blue Hill Ave. And something told him to go to the house of God. You see, because there is some momentum that is created, the heavens opened over our church. And so as he started to drive up and down Blue Hill Ave, he told me, he said, I was looking for a church that had cars in the parking lot. So I went by one church, I didn't see any cars. I went by another church, didn't see any cars. I drove past Jubilee and I saw a bunch of cars in the parking lot. So the momentum of our prayers created something in the heavens, and so he steps into the narthex, but it's after hours. It's past 5 o'clock, and all of the doors are closed, and he's just in the narthex, and he can't get in the sanctuary. He can't get down to the Lord. He can't go to the offices, and so he's there, and so something inside of him says, let me go outside of this building and check every single door. So he steps out of the building and he starts to go at every door, trying to open every single door. Every door was locked. One door, he got to the door, he opened it and it sprung open. And he went down in the lower level and he encountered someone and he said, I need to speak to a pastor. And he spoke to Pastor Mike for 2 hours. And I want you to know that something fell off of him. Every addiction, every generational curse, every demonic assignment that was released, there he is right now, was falling off his life at that prophetic moment. Why? Because the moment was created by momentum. He had a praying father. He had a praying grandmother. He had someone that was praying for him, crying out to God for him, that shifted the heavens. You can't tell me God doesn't move. You can't tell me God doesn't specialize in the miraculous. You can't tell me that you can get stuck in a moment and not get shifted into a momentum where your prayers and your praise and your and every single demonic assignment has to fall off your life. Why? Because the moment's been shifted to momentum and then the movement happens. Hear me. When movement happens, what happens is that you are not operating in your own strength. When movement happens, what happens is that all of heaven stands at attention because of your voice. Because you've been called to release a prayer that has power.
So now that you got the pastor's side of the story, Pastor Matt, I'm going to give you a few more inside details. So one of the crazy things was the day I went to Jubilee Church, it was on a Thursday, and the individual who spoke to me for 2 hours was Pastor Mike. And Pastor Mike said something to me. He said, oh, you know, we have morning prayer in the morning. They have morning prayer every morning at 6 a.m. And he said, yes, from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. And I thought to myself, you know, I'm really not going to get up in the morning and go to morning prayer. But I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. We talked for 2 hours. We prayed. And he said something to me that I really didn't understand at the time. He said, give me 3 days. Now, to be honest with you, I really didn't know what he meant. I didn't know if he meant, like, give me 3 days without having a drink, or give me 3 days coming to morning prayer. I really didn't understand it. I just knew that I was going to come to morning prayer the next morning, you know, see what it was about, and go do that. So the next morning came, 6 o'clock in the morning, I went to morning prayer. I walked in there, the presence of God was just crazy. You know, a woman was singing, the worship in there, the atmosphere, the power. I could feel the power. I could feel the power in the atmosphere. And it was an amazing experience. So I said, you know, I'm going to come back again the next day. So I went back the next day. And again, just the feeling, and it's not just about feeling. It was I could sense the power of God. Not to mention that here we are. I went back again another day, and I still didn't have a single withdrawal symptom. I'm talking about I didn't shake. I didn't, like I used to shake. I would sweat. I didn't die, obviously. I'm right here giving you the story right now. Nothing. Like everything just went away. I didn't have a single temptation or a desire. Still worked in Boston, still drove up and down Blue Hill Avenue where there's a liquor store on every corner. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so long story short, I went a second day, went a third day. I ended up going 122 days straight before I missed my first day going to morning prayer. And just the power that I experienced, just being in the presence of God every single morning. And the crazy thing was, like I said, I didn't know what he meant. I didn't know what he meant, you know, give me 3 days. I didn't know if he meant give me 3 days of, you know, I ended up telling him this. I said, I didn't know what you meant. What did you mean? And I think if I'm not mistaken, he said to me, oh, what I meant was, you know, give me 3 days coming to morning prayer or something like that. Either way, I gave more than 3 days. I ended up going 122. Every day before work, I just go. I just made it a part of my life. And before work, I would stop in for about an hour, half an hour sometimes, and just get my prayer on with God. And like I said, man, the power of God literally just like overtook my life completely. Now here I am. This was 2018 when this happened. I think it was October 17th, 2018. Here I am in 2020. Still haven't had a drink, and I'm about to get into, at a certain point, all the crazy and miraculous miracles that took place in my life since that very day. I mean, I'm gonna be real. Like the blessings were flooding my life so seriously that even Christians, I'm sorry to say this, even Christians were doubting what was taking place in me. Even Christians, I'm sorry to say this, but even Christians forgot that they served an immediate God. You know, it's crazy that the individual who had leprosy, you know, he said to Jesus, he said, yo, you know, he bowed down and he was like, yo, if you're willing, you can make me clean. You know what I'm saying? And it's, you know, the scripture says, you know, Jesus' response to him, he reached out to him, and it says immediately, he was healed. And I feel like, you know, sometimes even Christians forget the God that they serve. You know, immediately the man was healed. You know, you can go look at the story about the prodigal son. You know what I'm saying? The story about the prodigal son, you know what I'm saying? The dude left, he was gone. But when he came back, it says when he came to himself, you know what I'm saying? He came to his senses, and he turned around and he said, I'm going back home to my father's house. And as soon as he arrived, immediately his father grabbed him and embraced him. Immediately his father accepted him. Immediately his father put a ring on his finger. Immediately his father covered him with a beautiful robe. Immediately his father threw a big feast and a party. Immediately. And sometimes we get caught up thinking that we're supposed to, we gotta do this for so long. You know, my thing with God, I thought I was gonna wait years for God to bring me, to bless me in certain areas of my life. You know, to give me an amazing wife and all these other things. And so I want to share more of that story with you. But you know, so I'm you know, shortly after this all took place, I kept going to the church. Probably like the next week later, I believe it was a week later, I had gotten baptized. And then from that point, you know, I just kept you know, grinding it out with God, and the miracles just kept flooding through. And so I'm definitely gonna continue the rest of this story with you. But I'm gonna give you a little clip of when I actually got baptized.
This is Nickolas. I preached about Nickolas last Sunday because Nickolas was driving down Blue Hill Ave, and whenever he would face difficulties in his life, the enemy would whisper in his ear, go to the bar and go drink, or go to some substance to get your mind off of pain. But last Thursday, the voice of God spoke louder than the voice of the enemy. And last Thursday, as he was trying to do what he had normally done in the past, the Lord told him to go to a church that had cars in the parking lot. So he drove by a few churches and didn't see any cars. And so he drove by this church and saw a bunch of cars in the parking lot, walked into the narthex, but it was after hours, and so he couldn't get into any of the office doors. He couldn't get into the sanctuary. But God told him to go outside and to check every outer perimeter door. So he went from door to door, shaking on every door. And that's the word that I have for you, Nickolas. Is that you break barriers. You shift atmospheres. And you're going to knock on doors that are closed, and they are going to open. And there's another dimension of faith and grace that God is releasing to you. Because this man, hear me, this man of God is living the message that I've been preaching.
Yeah.
That God's a God of moments, momentum, and movement. So he checked every door, and every door was closed except the door in the corner. He shook the door, and the door opened. He went down into the lower level, and he just was asking, I need to speak to a pastor. And Pastor Michael Manigo was here serving, and they spoke for a couple of hours on Thursday night. And Pastor Michael Manigo said, you should come to morning prayer tomorrow, Friday morning. And that's the prayer hour that I lead, and we are worshiping. I came on Friday and I saw this man kneeling right here. And when I walked past him, I said, there's something supernatural about this young man. I want you to know, church, from that day, Thursday night, he has been to church every single day. So many of you have an encounter with God, and it's just a moment, but you don't create momentum, and that momentum will create a movement. And so, Nickolas, you are about to lead a movement, and there is a Moses generation, there's a Moses anointing upon you. So, Nickolas, because of your confession of faith and the finished work of Calvary, we baptize you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, who commands us to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Open heaven.